Welcome to the Hedgineer Podcast, hosted by Michael Watson.
Everyone, and welcome back to the Hedgineer Podcast and the last episode of Season 2. Starting next week, we're going to be kicking off a new format, bringing on a co-host, Jhanvi Virani, our COO, to start doing weekly episodes and staying up to date on what's going on within technology, data, and AI. So excited for that, but before we get there, I couldn't be more excited to talk about today's episode where we bring on Thomas from Daloopa, who's been on the show 3 times now, to go through what it's been like open sourcing the investor library of skills and agents that are arguably like the best corpus of data around how you do fundamental investing within the asset management space. And we talked about a lot of interesting concepts. One was how you start open sourcing content in a ecosystem that's historically been very locked down and closed off. And I think they're being a thought leader within pushing the AI for asset management ecosystem forward in that regard. He talks a lot about how he surprisingly wrote at least a third or half of the skills originally, but how the community starts taking a life of its own and contributing back to those skills. And it's a pretty interesting community because most of the users of Daloopa are pretty sophisticated investors and what that means for the quality of those skills over time. We touched a little bit on what his team uses AI for from like the internal operations, as well as how he's using Claude Code and compared that a little bit to Cowork. And then even touched on what it's been like for him working with the Anthropic team to build out the Excel plugin that they've rolled out over the last month. And does he think about that as a competitor? Does he think about that as a partner, as an opportunity or a risk, or a little bit all of the above? From a perspective of an entrepreneur that many people think about is, if I build something, is the frontier language models going to eventually help be a win behind my sale or something that could cause us to have to existentially rethink our business? Awesome thought leader. Loved the conversation, and I hope you enjoy it almost as much as I did. Thomas, I think this is the 3rd time you've come on the podcast.
Yeah, wow.
And it seems like every time you come on, you go through this new iteration of stepping into this like new version of Daloopa. And it's been like this emergence into this AI kind of like thought leader in the space for asset managers, coming from roots that were very focused on just high quality data within fundamentals. And I don't want to say that the Hedgineer Podcast has played any significant role in that, but I do feel like every time we talk, like you guys just come out with something epic on the tail end of it. And I think that at least this time you came out with something pretty epic in the last like 3 weeks. I'd love to chat with it specifically around the investing open source repo that you pushed out. It's available in the Claude marketplace, and there's a whole open source community around contributing to the skills and the knowledge base around that.
Yep.
And I think it's awesome, man. I think it's really cool. I think it's like really a thought leader in the space, and it's a bit of a glimpse of what the future might look like. And I'd love to kind of go through what it's been like open sourcing, the investing repo, and how did that come about? What's it been like as you start getting momentum? And ultimately we're talking about, where do you see that going from here?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of being a startup is you get to do like stuff that nobody has ever thought about. So like our space has always been this very close ecosystem, right? Like companies never think about open sourcing anything that they have. It's always like, oh, protect your mode. But when you really think about it, like the skills that we have in finance today, like how to build a model, what makes a good deck, how to write like a good investment memo, like these are universally understood truths that we've learned in our careers over time. But no one's really sat down and like wrote it out, even though all of us have it somewhere in our memory. And so I basically said, you know what would be cool if we can actually document all of these things, right? And just like write it out for the rest of the world to see. And, you know, with the AI wave, we basically have this opportunity to build agents, right? And really a skill is an agent, an agent's a skill. It's just 2 words that reflects the same thing. And I think like maybe if I take a step back and like we really think about what is an agent, right? Like this is this weird concept that people are trying to grapple their head around. An agent is nothing more than a text file. It's a literal .txt file or .md file. It's a markdown version of a text file, but it's basically a bunch of words. And there's no code in there. It's just like English prompting words. The difference between an agent versus like you prompting in Claude is an agent obviously has a lot more words in there. There's probably like hundreds of rows of words in there. And B is the same words, right? Because it's a text file. You're reusing the text file. So as you reuse a set of prompts, like in this case, the skill file or the agent, then you get similar output each time you run the agent on a different thing. And you can get really specific. You can have an agent just build you a model or just build you an M&A model. You can have an agent just do like guidance analysis, or you can agent just do supply chain analysis. But the idea is like in this text file, you're really, really describing the process of how to do a supply chain, and that's how to do a really, really good one. And this type of problem is perfect for open source because in the non-open source world, when people build product, what you're fundamentally saying is, I'm able to understand my customer's problem so well that I can build a product that can satisfy my customer's issues really well. And you can never get to 100% for every customer because everyone has some nuanced problem. So your product in an ideal world solves 80% of your customers' problems, and the last mile your customer solves for themselves. And almost all software products are like that. But in open source is unique because what open source basically says is, I'm going to give you all the tools for free, and you use that, and you can iterate on my open source. Like I'll help you solve the blank canvas problem, and then you can solve the last mile by taking what I've given to you and just adding to it, right? And if you look at all the big open source communities, that's basically like how the ecosystem operates. And because it's free and open source, people can contribute back, which is perfect for like the agent and the skill economy, because people who have a better understanding than, let's say, I do of how to build a model, and there's like hundreds of thousands of them out there, can then come back and say, hey, I can improve this for you. Or they can say, hey, in your library, you have, today we have 20 agents open source. You're missing something. Like, I have this, like, I'm just going to send it to you. And it would be good to just add it to the ecosystem. And what happens is like today we have close to 100 hedge funds who've like joined this open source community, they've forked it, they've contributed back, they've done all sorts of stuff. And so the rate of progress of what we're seeing in these agents is staggering because no one can build an agent better for a hedge fund than the sum of the 100 biggest hedge funds doing it together, right? 100 very large hedge funds doing it together. So it's like really powerful to just see how the iteration process is going on and like how quickly like you can build better and better skills, more and more skills. And we want to avoid, like, hopefully we get to avoid a universe where we go back to like this locked in ecosystem where the vendor is deciding on the product that you use and you choose to be, I'm a hedge fund and I voted on this member to use all of their agents and I'm buying their agents. But it really should be, an agent's a text file anyway, like anybody can create a text file. Participate in the open source, use it, contribute to it, do whatever you like with it, and let's build some really, really awesome agents together and just share with the community.
That's awesome. But I think there's another element there where for a lot of the skills, not all of them, for a lot of them, they're dependent on the Daloopa API, right? Like you do have this like world-class fundamental data set, company-specific KPIs, gets into like GAAP and non-GAAP components that historically was very valuable for a fundamental analyst building out an Excel model, something very company-specific, understanding the segmentation, product space, supply chain, and repurposing that same data asset and product that you have in the context of these skills and agents that you're developing. And a lot of time, like within a lot of these skills, there's also a reference to the Daloopa API skill.
Yep.
And that Daloopa API skill says, oh, you need an API key. In order to get an API key, you need to call Thomas and say like, hey, can I get an API key? Yes, that's a certain subscription model. Let me show you what it costs, enterprise or individual license. And you then have a mechanism of monetization of this ecosystem, which is different than just anyone going and creating, let me create an open source skill library for altruistic purposes. And I think that's a really interesting perspective in what is the future of the data economy, the data provider business model and piggybacking on the skill and the agent proliferation and even open sourcing that to be able to provide free context on what you need to do with this data, but you actually have to pay for the data itself.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, do you think that is like a trend that we're scratching the surface on?
Yes,
you're just ahead of the curve, or I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah. So, Andre Karpathy, like probably the biggest AI thought leader out there, he recently made this comment, which I fully agree with, which is like all companies should just be an API company, because if you put your API with Claude, then it removes any need on the front end, on the agent. Like all the agents should be free, the front end should be free, and you should just be paying for the API. And the way I think about like our open source community is Daloopa is a fork of our own open source, right? So if you said, I don't want to subscribe to Daloopa, I'm going to use a different vendor for data, like that's totally fine. The skills will still work. You just, instead of using a Daloopa API, use another vendor's API. The skills will still work as well. We think that we stand to win in this game because our data is just so good. It's just the best. So if you wanted the best memos, then you should have the best APIs. But if you're like, look, I don't have the budget, like that's not like what I care about. I just want to be able to write a memo. If the quality of the data is not there, like so be it. Then you can still run it, right? You just won't have the quality of the data that you want in like a really, really high quality enterprise memo. So, open source communities have been monetized, for a long time, like Red Hat, if you remember back in the days. And it's about like being a contributor to the community, but also maintaining a version of it that is just better than just a regular open source because your API is going into it. And the biggest shift I think that's happening right now is we went from a world where chat is the AI interface, and most people think about AI as chat, to now agents being the interface. And the change there is we've always thought about paying for something from a software perspective. If I go into my browser and I'm logging to some service, I'm paying for the service. That's something that it's been ingrained in us as a habit. But that's changing now, right? Like front end is totally free. Like you can just code your own front end if you want to. And agents should also be free. So the idea is on the artifact side, if you're generating any item out of the large language model, that should be free. Like my skills ideally should work with like Claude or OpenAI's latest models, but you could put in like any model. You could put an open source model in there if you want to, right? It just won't perform as well. But if you want the highest performing set of agents, the agent itself is free. Pay for a good model, pay for good data, and you will have good artifacts and good outcomes.
And not to be devil's advocate, like if I were to build your Karpathy's model of everyone should be an API company, what does that API actually do? Is it a traditional REST API that just vends data, or do I put some of the skills, some of the models behind the API as well? And so that context that is contained within the skill, opposed to giving that away for free, I might then just give away the tokens that are derivative products of running the agent server side with really good data. And then downstream agents still might consume it, but they're actually consuming not raw data, but they're consuming derivative data that might have some element of value add from the contextualization that happens behind that API.
Yeah.
And in that scenario, you're potentially paying for both skills and data.
Yeah.
Opposed to just the data and you give away the skills for free. And I'm sure you've thought about that kind of lever. And it seems like you're definitely on the side of, hey, we got great data. Like that's where our true alpha is at. Let's give away the skills for free. But
so I always think back to I read the biography of Enzo Ferrari recently, and in the early days when Ferrari was primarily a racing team, the founder Enzo Ferrari himself used to always say this: when you buy a Ferrari, you buy the engine, and I give away the car for free. And that is something that I really believe in, which is here we are not just trying to build a good engine. We will build a good car. Like a Ferrari is a good car, right? But the business of Ferrari does not think of the car. I mean, that's changed now, but the business of Ferrari does not think of the rest of the car as what they're monetizing. They believe that they're just the best engine builders in the world. It's all about the engine power for them. And that's the way I think about it. Obviously, the engine needs to work very well with the car. Like if you gave me a Ferrari engine tomorrow, I wouldn't know what to do with it. Like, how do I even think about assembling a chassis, right? And so Ferrari ended up building very, very good cars. And that's what we think of ourselves. We monetize the engine, but we're still going to build the best car in the world. My view is just someone likes their car red, someone likes their car with 2 doors, someone likes their car with 4 doors. Like, I don't know, but I'm happy to give you all of that ancillary stuff for free. Fortunately for us, there's no cost of goods associated with a text file. So like, it's much easier for me to give it away for free than like a car company could. But the reality is, I really do think that any of the agent stuff, you should be iterating on it and you should be making it really good. But unless you make it free, you will be hard limited by how quickly you can grow, like the quality of it. Because if you started a company, like right now, you raise some money from venture capital and you say, I'm going to build the best agents in the space. Like, how do you build faster than the community of everyone in the space participating? Like, it'll be really, really hard. You might be more focused in every individual, but we're talking about professionals who practice this art every single day. You know, if even 1% of them contributed to the community, like you cannot outbuild that horsepower, right? So that's the beauty. Now, from a data perspective, there is a really important thing for us to do very well. And I think a lot of our customers will never see this, but it's important, and it's what I call the tools. So when you think of like a regular REST API, it's quite difficult to use if you don't know like the schema of the API, because like you don't know what is in it, right? So how does the large language model know how to call an API? Like what is the documentation? What does it need to know? Like what is in your database? Like if a particular skill requires a lot of data, do you flood the context window? Like do you break the system? And so on my end, what I need to put a lot of effort into is thinking about the tools to connect us with the model. And I think where we're probably a little more forward thinking is when we speak to the labs, we actually tell them, you have to do post-training on our data. You have to do post-training on like our connectivity, because we are aligned that the best outcome is how do you get the customer to have a seamless experience. So if someone wrote a single prompt, built me a model, like that in and of itself doesn't have a lot of context, but we should be able to provide so much post-training work together that that simple prompt actually delivers a model that resembles what they care about. So we have to take care of the tool connectivity on the background between my API and their large language model. We have to provide all the context. We have to be open-minded about doing post-training together. I think that's the thing a lot of data companies are not open-minded about.
I'm very afraid of that.
Right. People are very afraid of like, oh my God, if you train on my data, like what is my moat? And I'm almost like, your moat is moving fast. Your moat is just developing a set of technology that hasn't existed before. Like if you play defense all the time, you're never going to score. So like maybe think about how to score more. Think about how do we build a set of technology that hasn't existed before? How do we contribute to the community? How do we make sure that we are changing the way investment research is being done? And not to worry too much about the defensibility of it. Like the defensibility comes later when you become a very large company and then you have to worry about protecting your margins. Like, yeah. But I'm a startup. I shouldn't worry about everything. I should just be focused on building really, really good product.
I'm curious because you say that skills are just text files.
Yeah,
which I
pretty
think
much
simplifies the technical component, but I think doesn't do justice for the quality of the content that's in that text file.
Yep.
Because as you said, a skill can be good, it can be bad, and it's not whether or not it's a TXT or a .md file. It's a function of the text that's actually contained within that. And how much time do you spend writing skills? Were you involved in the initial skill design?
Yeah.
And do you still spend time contributing to the skills of this?
I do. A lot of the skills are 100% written by me.
Oh, really?
Word by word, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, a lot of them actually are. And then my team writes the rest of them. Our customers have contributed a bunch now. So now it's like a big hodgepodge. But I would say like yeah, probably like a third of them or a quarter of them are just like 100% word by word I wrote. But the reality is like when you write a skill, it might not be you writing it, right? Like you might be using Claude to do a lot of the editorial work. You write the skill. But you're absolutely right. like technically a skill is a text file, but it's almost like saying technically an essay is a bunch of words.
Yes.
Like you could write a good essay or you could write a
So is a
article.
dissertation.
So is a dissertation. A PhD thesis is nothing but a bunch of words.
Yeah.
But
It's
it's a little
fine.
bit more than a bunch
Yeah.
of words, right? I think that's why there are good skills and there are bad skills. There are good agents and there are bad agents. And you can measure good on quality of the output, how many tokens it consumes. Like, are you an intermediate step, or is this skill able to just take you to the very, very end of like what you care about? So just like how any work product out there, you can grade the quality. And when I think about the quality of a text file, the fastest way to get it to high quality is just with a lot of people working on it, basically, as opposed to betting on the fact that one vendor is going to focus on like this one text file. Like I'm sure I can build a lot of good skills on my own, but I'm sure if 10 people help me out, I can build a lot more.
Yeah. We do Claude implementations for a lot of funds, and we were talking about your skills the other day, and one of the things we were working through is how much of this do we want to just take off the shelf and assume this is beta that we accept, and how many of these skills do we want to refine and think of that as alpha. And I think that's an interesting framing, especially around the concept of open sourcing, because if in theory the language model was perfectly, like hallucination is perfectly solved, the weights get better, quality of data gets better, that context, which is captured within the skills, ultimately represents what your alpha is, especially from a discretionary side. And from an investment manager that's starting to really invest on their skill library and the way in which they are using AI to help generate alpha or be part of that process, one of the decisions you're going to have to make is how much better are your skills than what exists in open source. And I do think there has to be some element of margin there in order for alpha to exist from a discretionary perspective. Otherwise, anybody could take any of these open source skills, use state-of-the-art language models, and start generating some element of returns above whatever like the market index is.
Yep.
And I'm curious, do you see yourself as like you are trying to create the best beta version of these skills?
So I've always told this to my team, investors, everything is Daloopa will always be in the market for beta, and we will never touch the market for alpha, right? I'm a firm believer that my job in the community is to basically make beta easily accessible. And beta, I define it as like table stakes, right? Like how do I take data? Like when I first started collecting data, it was about, there are funds that couldn't collect data at the scale of like the big 100 people like pod shops. Like how do we make sure that everyone can get the same access to really good, sound, fundamental historical data? And in skills is how do we make sure that people have access to really good investment research that you can generate? Now, what you do with the investment research is a totally different thing because that's where judgment comes in. Or you can orchestrate skills. I'll give you like using the same skill. I'll give you an example of how two different funds implemented it. So on our open source, there's this skill called supply chain. And what supply chain basically does is if you give it a ticker or 10 or whatever, it will go through every part of the disclosures within the company and identify all the companies that supply into it, like how much of their revenue is from, let's use like Apple, for instance, right? Like how much of Apple's cost of goods sold is made up of this supplier, that supplier, that supplier. And then from a supplier's perspective, how much of their revenue is Apple. And then you look into the inventory breakdown and you say for each set of work in process, raw materials, finished goods, like how much of that does it flow? And if you map all of this back in time and correlate it with gross margins, you actually can figure out sensitivity of where the supply chain lives to each other. So that's a skill that is on our open source right now. You pull it and it will build you this like huge map of the supply chain of any company. So we saw a fund basically take that skill and say, okay, we're just going to implement it for all the companies under coverage because overnight we see supply chain for all of the companies. That's great. We saw another fund say, okay, we're going to take this skill and we're going to run real world sensitivity analysis. So I'm going to test to see how each supply chain has changed over time. So I'm going to find the moments in time where there was an actual shock to quantity. So for instance, right now we have a massive oil shock. So every oil company supply chain is like somewhat disrupted. And this is not the first time we've had oil over 100, right? So you can look at every instance in history when oil went above 100 and what happened to the supply chain. And you can then sort of try to predict what happens next. So instead of just pulling the supply chain scale, they pulled that and then they ran sensitivity back to the previous few oil shock events to help them understand what are the range of outcomes that could happen over the next 3 to 6 months. And I thought that was fascinating. It's the same skill, but two different sets of implementation. And I'll argue like you could probably generate alpha just on how you implement the skills.
But should that be a skill in and of itself to do the sensitivity analysis?
Oh, they did. That's exactly what they did.
And should that be open sourced? Like, should that become the new beta? Like, if that's alpha right now,
yes,
in this general direction, is that implementation a new beta?
Yes. My view is alpha today becomes beta tomorrow.
Always.
And that's always true, right? So there will always be a lag between the cutting edge agents that people are able to figure out to generate alpha versus like the community catching up. It's like when I think about like credit card data, such a good example, right? There was a period where credit card data was pure alpha.
Yeah.
Arguably, a lot of credit card data today is just, you just need to have it because everybody else has it. There's probably some alpha left, but not as much as when it first came, right? But it's definitely table stakes for a consumer team. And this feels a lot like it. Like, you know, you have to get to the point, like you always want to be at the bleeding edge of like, what is the latest thing you can do, right? Like, can you orchestrate like massive like simulation analysis? Like if you could figure out large scale simulation analysis today, I'll argue there's probably some alpha, right? Because we've had quant simulation on price data, but we've never had fundamental simulation. Like, no one has been insane enough to take every model that they've built and link them all together to create like a global model at a fundamental bottoms-up basis, right? So if you created that today, and I think there are people out there trying to do this, you probably get like 6 to 12 months of alpha because you can simulate the world on like a very precise fundamental level. But at some point, that set of skills probably flows into the open source as well.
And how do you think about how much of that you want to capture, right? Because like it does make sense for like, oh, you have the supply chain analysis. As much as you downplay, it's just a text. And I take it back. And you did emphasize there's actually some expertise to it. And I think it's also telling that you wrote maybe a third to half of the skills because, I mean, you might be a humble guy, but anyone that hears you talk about fundamentals in any sector-specific domain, your capacity to go deep on that is top 0.1%. So your capacity to continue to go down that rabbit hole of building out that corpus of skills, you start capturing beta in a way that it becomes table stakes. And those skills now become a prerequisite if you want to operate within capital markets to make sure that at least your research is as good as what Thomas is producing. And if it's not, you have to use it. And it's an interesting mechanism that you've started that with fundamentals, but could you expand that to partnerships with pricing data? Could you expand that to partnerships with risk models? Can you expand that to partnerships with OMSs? Can you expand that to PMSs? Entire, like, what does the beta version of a multi-strategy, cross-asset class, multi-manager fund look like? And if you have the repository that has the best collection of curated skills that work together, and then good, clean data that feeds into that, that becomes the table stakes of beta that everyone has to have plugged into their systems. Otherwise, you're just playing catch up.
Yeah, that's the dream. The dream is to take every single piece of like tooling that we have today and create and add to the community of open source like a version of that. So, you know, today, for instance, like vector models, right? Everyone has their own version of vector models. I don't believe there is like an open source vector model out there, even though like somewhere in our heads it's probably the same.
There's some. It's I think his name was like Zero Fox, and he was on like Quant Twitter and Quant Reddit. He put on a decent open source factor model, and then he disappeared about a year ago. And I think that there's some stuff that's been out there, but I don't think that there's a really good open source factor model. It's not hard. It's not rocket science. I mean, it's hard to get all of the loadings correct and all the nuances for names,
But
but
the
like
base version, it's not that. Especially if you're looking at like momentum vector,
totally,
right?
yeah.
Like no one thinks the calculation of momentum is proprietary.
Mhm.
Like, it's just a formula that you run. So I do think that what I want to do over time is like to attach a lot of these other skills that are not like fundamental data related, but are necessary in the work of basically investment management. I'll give you a whole other set of skills that we're working on. So a lot of finance is actually just communication, if you think about it, right? After you have done your investment research, you need to talk to the sell side, talk to a banker, talk to your buddy. You need to convey the message to your PM, to your MD. So there's a lot of communication that happens after the work has been, after you've generated your artifacts, you need to communicate. Today, there are effectively no skills in that. And we know that there are good communicators and there are horrible communicators. We have people with amazing ideas who can't seem to pitch it well.
Yep.
And we have people with horrible ideas that pitch it really well and they just bleed for money. Right. So how do we try to like standardize a lot of those skills as well? Like how do you do like prep for meetings, right? If you are walking in to an IC meeting, like can you create a skill to help you prep for that? Right. So a lot of these skills, I would even argue, should also be open source because it just helps you communicate better. It's a very core part of your life. So it's not just the analytics on the data side, which I think is important, which is, you know, what we're doing right now, but it's also every aspect of the work, you should be able to create a skill in open source. And like at the very core, like, you know, obviously I run a business, like we need to make money. The reason I'm so thrilled about creating this community is we are in this position where the more people adopt agents and skills, the better it is for my business. Even if you're adopting an agent that has to do with communication and has nothing to do with my fundamental data, maybe a little bit, but like not quite. The fact that you are doing that means that you are 10 times more likely to use an agent on fundamental data than to like use pen and paper. And that's the world I want to be in, right? So the more I can help the community move into an agentic layer, the better it is for my business. And like we'll find ways to like monetize it over time. But if we can create a tsunami, I'm not too worried about which part of the tsunami I'm riding.
It's interesting on the communication point because we had a conversation with one of our clients' CIOs today, and they're just getting going with deploying Cloud Enterprise. And they're starting to complain that the quality of communication is deteriorating because of AI. Because a lot of it's starting to look like AI slop that you might see in LinkedIn messages. And one of the first things that I at least told them is that I think everyone has to go through that journey themselves where they realize, oh, you can do so much with AI, not just to help you do research or help you generate code, but you can also use it to generate an email or a Slack message or like a broader memo. And the very first time you do that, like, oh, it looks good, let me copy paste it and send it. And there's a real risk to doing that because you lose your voice and you lose control over the narrative. And what I was telling them is that there's actually a human skill, not like a skill on the concept of a Claude skill, but a human skill in being able to work effectively with AI, but not have it control your voice and control your narrative. And that's something that I think everyone at least has to go through that journey to some extent before they rely too much on AI for communication, because otherwise you do end up generating slop or you produce content that doesn't have edge, that you lose your voice.
Yes.
So that's something that you have to be careful of as you start moving more towards like using AI to manage the comms and internal interactions.
So yeah, if I leave aside the Daloopa product for a second and just think about the fact that, you know, we're a business with like real business problems. And one cool thing about being an AI business is that you have a culture of adopting AI internally. So we have folks using AI for all sorts of stuff, sales, marketing, like everything. You can think of it, we're probably like trying something there. And in the first set of iteration, what we saw was exactly what you mentioned. Like people are using it to generate Slack messages and just dumping it out there. So we saw a spike in total number of Slack messages and it was all AI slop. And we basically had to come in and at an executive level, like say, look, communication is not about writing stuff in Slack. It's about getting your message understood by the other party, Like that has always been true. It doesn't matter if you write it well, you don't write it well, AI writes it well, AI doesn't write it well. If the other party hasn't understood the message like well, then you have not communicated. I don't care how many words have been written, right? That's what communication is. So what we're seeing people gravitate towards now is instead of having AI help you write the stuff, which was never the purpose, is you ask AI, how can I best communicate this idea? So let's say the product team wants to communicate a very technical element of the product to the sales team who might not be as technical because they're not engineers. How do I communicate this, right? Do I just send them a documentation link? Like that would be a bad idea, right? Do I summarize documentation using AI? Well, that doesn't solve the technical problem, right? So, but if you went to Claude and you just like had a conversation about how do I do this, then it helps you frame a thought process. And then you still have to do the communication on your own. So you're right, the human skill matters a ton. If you just went in there and be like, here's my documentation link, like create a one pager so I can send to sales, it's just not going to be very good. No one's going to read it. But if it says, hey, what you should do is you call an office hour for 30 minutes, walk through this, but really walk through the demo and the outcome. Don't spend too much time on the technical side because like your sales guys like don't care about the technical. They just care about the value it's delivering to customers. Now you're using AI, right? So a lot of our internal implementation of AI is also just this blocking and tackling trial and error to see what works and trying to measure it every step of the way.
I'm curious how you as an organization develop and manage skills internally. Because there's obviously the skills that you make open source, but there's also the skills that are just how you operationalize. Individuals can create their own skills. You can have organizational skills. There's different ways of implementing that. I'm curious how you guys are trying to solve that.
Yeah, so our individuals, I'm sure they all build their own skills. Like I see it happen all the time, and for their own purposes. And then there are some skills which we think that as an organization will help a lot. And a lot of this is at the observability and the measurability layer. So I'll give you one example. I wanted to understand of all of my customer feedback, complaints, issues, sales, like every single conversation with a customer that has to do with product, like what are the few vertices of what our customers are talking about, right? So we went through all of our Gong calls, all of our Zoom recordings, all of the email correspondence, and we basically built a set of little skills to understand each of these problems. So a skill is just going in there to hunt for like, are there issues with your data? Are there issues with your latency of your data? Are there issues with the delivery of your data? And then you can have all the skills, all these agents then communicate with each other. So there's an observability layer where they communicate with each other. And then they can tell you, oh, this was an issue that was mentioned. So I'll give you one example, actually. The single largest mention of an issue with Daloopa is our coverage. We cover 6,000 companies today. It's not the global coverage yet. So there are companies we don't cover. And by and large, that's the number one pushback people have against us, which is like, hey, I need to cover the Vietnamese stock exchange. You don't have companies there yet. But you could have an agent that figures out if the number of mentions is correlated with the criticality, because then you can measure the number of mentions with like true economic decisions. Does that create a churn risk? Does that create a deal that's not won? Like, what is the outcome of that number? And it turns out that coverage is actually a very, very low contributor to like actual dollars, right? We have a few issues where like we had some latency problems. Like there was basically a system outage with I think it was like an S3 day where there was a system outage. And so we then updated a couple of our customer models and we got complaints that sounded really, really heavy. And people were like, hey, like you should have like had two different systems running. Like you shouldn't just have like one data center. Like this is mission critical for us. And so we realized, hey, even though there were a few complaints like this, but the gravity of those complaints were a lot higher. So in the old days, you would measure just by number of tickets, right? Which is like a really bad measure because like some tickets are just like frivolous and some tickets are really important. But now we have all these skills and they are constantly in communication with each other. So you can orchestrate and actually understand which part of your product needs to be worked on and which part just is a lot of noise and there's no signal.
Do you have a CRM that consolidates all the client feedback, or are you just using something like an M365 email connector for capturing that?
So we pull the API, and if there is no API, we just grab the CSV files from all of our sources. So we have Zoom, we have Gong, we have Salesforce, we have Outlook. So not every one of them has an API, but having an API makes your life a lot easier. But even if you don't have an API, you can just do the data dump.
Right. Do you have internal AI engineers that kind of work on the operations for Daloopa? Do you kind of
question.
do that yourself?
That's a great question.
How do you think about that?
Yeah, so we thought about whether or not we want to bring in internal AI engineers, and I think the answer is no, because everybody needs to be an AI engineer. Like if you have the role of an AI engineer, at least for an AI startup, then it creates this environment where people don't want to mess with AI on their own, and then they just create requests to this guy to like build skills for them. But what we want is we want everybody to know how to do it and everybody to be building their own. And over time, what you start seeing is the first skill everybody built on the sales team was to help them prep for a sales call. Because it's a very natural thing to do. You're prepping for it. You're trying to understand who am I talking to? What is their background? If I'm talking to a fund, like what is their strategy? Just a very basic like research or prospect type work. And so everyone built some version of the skill. Some people's skills are very good, and some people's skills are basically just a summary of LinkedIn, right? And we realized that the good ones will then share their skill file with their colleagues. And over time, you start to realize which are the good skills and which are not the very good skills. And people start telling each other, hey, by the way, you can actually format it better. It doesn't have to be 3 pages. You can do it on 1 page because then you can read it on your phone, right? So if you are jumping on a call, like you could have your phone ready so you can like refer to the materials because you're sharing your screen. I'm like, that's really smart, right? So like those skills start to like show up a little bit. Now, if you have an AI engineer, like these nuances get lost because the AI engineer never realizes that because you're sharing your screen, you cannot pull anything up on your screen. So if you need to quickly like have a glance at like where, like how long this person has worked.
That's a problem they would never
think of, right? But a salesperson who's doing this all day, like knows this problem intimately well, but may not realize it's a problem until someone else, you see a solution from another colleague and you're just like, oh, that's smart.
So do your sales teams use an AI layer on top of like an OpenAI or Claude? Or are they using Claude directly?
Just Claude.
So I'm curious. One, that was kind of one of my questions. And then where are you landing right now in usage between Claude Cowork, Claude Chat, Claude Code?
So everyone only uses Claude Code.
Do you use Claude Code in the terminal or Claude Code in the desktop app?
Oh, I mean, I let the guys choose what they prefer, but we always encourage terminal.
What about you?
Terminal only.
Got it.
Yeah.
Why is that?
It's just faster, it's more token friendly, and you can run it for longer. It's easier. Like terminal is just the easiest UX.
Yeah, I'm still stuck in the terminal. I think it's interesting to see what's happening right now with Cowork. I think that what they came out with, I think it was yesterday, is so they've had task scheduling for a little bit, but now they have task scheduling with a remote scheduler. And so your machine doesn't have to be on. I think that that's kind of like scratching the surface of where they're going with running agents that are more, you just write the text file and it runs within their cloud, always on.
Well, I do think like Cowork is basically a user interface layer on top of like Claude Code.
And they just don't have the word code in it and you don't see the code.
Right. And it looks cleaner, right? It looks less intimidating, but anything you can do on Claude Cowork, you can 100% do on Claude Code. Anything.
Yes.
Right. So, but I can do stuff on Claude Code that I cannot do on Cowork, at least yet.
Correct.
So like I've never found a reason to use Cowork over Claude Code. The other thing about Cowork is sort of like running Claude Code with like dangerously accept permissions, right? It kind of freaks me out a little bit.
You still get to allow tool usage. I think it's part of the workflow. I don't think it's all dangerously accept.
It's not fully dangerously.
Yeah.
I because like, dude, there are stuff on my computer that I don't want like an AI to just like do, right? Like, I don't want you to log into my bank account for no reason.
Right.
I don't want you to send an email without my approval. Like, there are things I just don't want an AI to like have full control over. I want you to be focused on just one task I give you with like 0% margin for you sending a random email out that I don't want you to send. So we generally don't allow Cowork in the company unless it's like engineering related, like experiments on how our customers are using. We also haven't seen customers use Cowork because there is a bit of like a security and compliance question around how do you get co-work to work? Because a lot of the power of co-work is sort of the fact that it is not fully secure, right? Because it has access to everything. So the lack of security is almost more of a feature than a bug. And it's hard to containerize co-work, whereas like for Claude Code, it's super easy to just sandbox it.
Well, there are some elements of sandboxing with co-work because it creates almost a virtual machine.
Yeah.
And then you can select what directories you want mounted onto it. So you can explicitly wall off what directories it can and cannot touch. And the more you rely kind of on MCP, so it's like more networked IO versus file-based IO, it does have some element of control. In the Claude marketplace, like in all of the hooks, still work within co-work. So if you wanted to do a compliance check on before tool call and then scan for malicious prompt injections, all of the hooks that you have within Claude Code are there. I do think that for some users, the barrier of entry is just much easier with co-work than looking at a terminal.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's easier because co-work feels more like software. It feels more like a folder structure than Claude Code, even though they have both folder structures, right?
Yeah. And the UX is cool. Like I do like being able to see the progress in the top right. And then you can see like a nice little icon for all of your different connectors, and you can see your context as well. The task scheduler at the bottom. So and ultimately you could do the same thing with co-work, right? Like it's just almost like a nice IDE for non-technical users.
It's a nicer IDE.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
And there's no reason why that same IDE won't also exist for Claude Code as well if you're using desktop.
Yeah, like I think there's very low. I mean, there's a difference obviously between using like VS Code versus Claude Code because like VS Code you get to visualize the folder structure, and it's quite material, right, to be able to visualize it, especially when you have a lot of different skills. Because like again, trivializing this a little bit, a skill or an agent is a text file. Text files need to sit within folders, right? So all agents live in some version of a folder structure, and if you don't visualize your folder structures well and you just like put all of your skills into one folder structure, it starts to become a mess, especially when you need different skills to work together. So I like to have all my skills working together, like categorized nicely in like neat folder structures. And like VS Code is very good for that, right? Because you're just working, you can see the folder structure, and co-work is probably like similar in terms of like that psychological, like I know where I'm currently operating within. Whereas in terminal is a little like, you just kind of have to know where you are.
Yeah.
You just have to remember the path that you're in, and like you got to remember to like go in and out of the path.
Totally. And if that's not native to you, you haven't been doing that for like 10 years since you were in high school or in college, you lived in the terminal, that concept of like, wait, I can't visually see the files.
Yeah, it's a bit weird.
Is foreign. It's the same thing that like, if you're used to looking at Excel spreadsheets and you can scroll down and see every row, and then you have a pandas data frame, and
That's right.
You're like, wait, it's just DF? Like, where's all the rows in it? And I can do like DF summary, and it tells me like how many rows there are, and like the mean is, and the total row count.
I can see the numbers.
I need to scroll and see the numbers, right? Like, where are they? It's like the psychological barrier that I think everyone goes through. It's the same thing with the terminal.
Yeah. I do think that's what makes co-work like a pretty incredible like product, which is it solves the biggest problem in AI today, which is change management. Well, it doesn't solve it, but it helps a lot, because the true adoption of agentic workflows basically means you got to go from chatting in ChatGPT or Claude to like working in a terminal. That's a huge jump. It's like going to someone who's lived in Excel his whole life to like, hey, like from tomorrow onwards, work in Pandas data frames. It's like, what is Pandas?
Yes. Yeah. Like you've been speaking English your entire life. Your new job's going to be in Portuguese.
Yeah, exactly.
I can learn it, but like it's going to take me some time, and it feels very foreign.
Yeah. Whereas co-work feels like a folder structure. It feels like it almost even looks like the Windows like directory structure.
Yeah. It still has the chat in the middle, so like it's got that familiarity of either ChatGPT or Claude.ai where you have chat, and so it's a nice kind of blend between it. It'll be interesting to see like how it gets pick up and adoption. But there's other methods of accessing Claude, and so one is the Excel plugin, and I'm sure you have plenty of experience with it. Like Daloopa is originally known as an Excel plugin as well. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the Claude Excel plugin? what are your thoughts on like the quality? Like it's getting better over time. You can now add skills within the Excel plugin. You couldn't add skills just 2 weeks ago. So they're making it more in parity with the rest of the Claude ecosystem. What are your thoughts on the product and where it's going?
Yeah, so the person who runs the Excel plugin is our partner and my personal friend from Anthropic, Nick. And I remember when they were building it, I spent time with him just like walking him through how to do it, like just thinking through the problems that needs to be solved with him. Because like you're right, we've had an Excel plugin for a long time. I guess that leads to a natural question, like why in the world would I be so open about here's how we build our version of like an Excel agent and like let me help you build yours, right? At the end of the day, my belief is more people using Excel agents is good for me because you could use the Daloopa Excel agent, which is Scout, which is really, really good. Like I'm always amazed at how much modeling that thing can do just on its own. But it's really down to the data, right? No matter how good you are at moving, the keyboard around, like the data is still what makes a model. And if you were to use Cloud for Excel, the first thing you'll realize is they ask you to turn on the Daloopa MCP. So that again is my data. So how you want to use a Daloopa distribution channel to consume data, or a Claude distribution channel, and like OpenAI just launched OpenAI for Excel. We did a launch dinner with them last week. The distribution pipeline will differ customer to customer. I think some people will like the UX of Claude. Some people will like the Daloopa specificity of what like our Excel agent is built for. But I don't want to be deciding for my customers how they want to consume my data. I do want to empower them to be able to consume my data in every way.
Yeah.
So if you say, I'm going to use Claude for Excel, I'm not going to explain why. I'm going to be like, no problem. My data is in there natively, right? If I'm an OpenAI shop, I didn't get to choose this decision. It was chosen for me by senior management, and I'm never going to fight this decision. No problem. Daloopa's data is going to be in there.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on Scout. And we'd said earlier that let's open source the skills. Let's still have our core engine be the data, and agents for everybody, good for the ecosystem, great for us. Pie grows, grow with it. But with something like Scout, it obviously has access to the Daloopa data, and it's an agent that can work within Excel. You have Anthropic starting to do more and more in Excel, more resources going there, lots of adoption on it. I see that as a possibility. Do you actually take all the context and knowledge in Scout, opposed to giving all of those skills away for free and allow somebody to bring them into Claude for Excel? Do you actually put Scout, take that context, and put that behind MCP and have that be part of the value proposition of Daloopa, where you might have Nick building the general Claude agent for interacting with Excel, but then when it has like, hey, I have a really hard problem, Scout/Thomas, what do you think I should do right here? And then Scout runs server side with Daloopa data. It's like, all right, this is a very tricky situation you're dealing with. Let me kind of walk you through what you need to do here.
Yeah, so I do think that Scout will always be slightly better, or more than slightly better, than all the general Excel agents. And I'll get to that in a second. But I don't think Scout, and Scout isn't a paid product. When you subscribe to be a Daloopa customer, if you've been a customer a year ago and we didn't have Scout and we have Scout now, we have Scout now, right? So it's not open source because like it's not really open sourceable. It's like our context window. But the output of Scout is open source. If you go to my open source library, there's literally a build model skill. So as we get better in how to build models agentically, our build model skill gets better. What Scout, however, does is Scout is not a model builder. What we're training it to do is to create a system where you can take a model and understand what like true hedge fund grade quality needs to be and work towards that. So like, let's back up for a second, right? If you were to use Claude today and you build an Excel model, and you ask like one of these big hedge fund analysts or PMs and like, what do you think of this model? It's basically like, it's probably fine if you're interviewing for a job, but like, I can't use this for my day-to-day. Like, it just doesn't have the quality of the hedge fund stuff. It's missing things like, how do you set up a grid properly? How do you think about seasonality in the business? Like, the model that you're building, let's say you're building a software company versus a hardware company. Software company gross margins, for the most part, you think about it as percentage of revenue. Hardware company gross margins, not percentage of revenue. The cyclicality, there's inventory management, there's supply chain considerations. So hardware company gross margin is a whole craft to build, right? And it creates operating leverage repercussions like down the line in the way software companies don't quite have like complicated operating leverage calculations. How do you know that, right? How do you know a company is cyclical and you need to very purposefully think through how to do gross margins for that company versus a company that's not cyclical? And what if a company has both cyclical and non-cyclical units? Then what do you do, right? What do you do with companies with like high fixed costs versus variable costs? So that's really what Scout is about. It's about having this because like we power so many of the large investors today. We are able to speak to them on a constant basis, understand what extreme quality looks like. And it's not just about the mechanics of Excel, but the reasoning behind how to build a good model. And so Scout is designed to be able to like bridge towards that. But that knowledge that we gain from our customers, again, we don't think about how do we monetize the fact that we know what a really good model looks like, because we want to monetize the data infrastructure. But Scout will always be tuned towards this very hyper-specific purpose, which is it's not going to be able to help you do like accounts payable math if you're a CFO. But if you are a PM at a big long short fund, it's going to build you a damn good model. Like in all the ways that you think about it. It's going to think about how do you, we're thinking about how do you figure out when there is a significant step change like quarter to quarter. What most analysts do is they create a shift after comment box. And then they take the most important part of either the transcript or the footnote in the queue, and then they add it to that context window because they want to be able to go back and just take a quick look at it. So how do we figure out what makes a significant change and what caused a significant change and agentically take the information and put it in there, right? The difficult part isn't doing it. That copy and pasting, like that's a solved problem. But the difficult part is when do you do it?
Yeah. And that is probably a skill. Is that a Daloopa skill or is that because there's still some edge that you have, right? The whole building of your product, you don't open source the entire thing. And so it's just kind of an interesting, you're also building a business, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out how do you build a business in those worlds? Because I'm sure when you found out Anthropic's going to be going heavy in Excel, there has to be some element of, oh shoot, now am I competing with Anthropic? Am I partnering with them? Is this going to increase the pie or is this going to steamroll me? And all of those are theoretical possibilities, right? Like none of it's a distribution of probabilities.
Yeah, I mean, we got super, super, super lucky because we've never monetized a software product or a front-end product. We've always never charged for it. We've only charged for data. So we sort of stumbled into a world where being a data company is awesome, right? Because like Andrew Gabardi says, it's all about becoming an API. And we were like, that is so aligned with what we want to take the business. So as we get these like Scout building skills like nailed down, I think we open source them anyway, right? Because what is an advantage today probably becomes beta tomorrow. So like, why not? Like just give everyone the ability to build the best possible model out there and just fulfill the requirement for everybody and just monetize on the data layer. So you're right. When I first heard that Anthropic was going to do Excel, we were like, okay, this is competitive. But we took a step back and we asked ourselves, the definition of competition has to be that they're fighting with you for revenue. Right? It's like, I have a website, you have a website. We are not competitors because we have a website. We're not competitors because we don't fight for the same pool of revenue. And we're like, but we're not charging for it. So like, how can this ever be competitive? Because it can never take away market share that we don't have any of because it's free.
Totally.
So that's where we said like, okay, like let's just keep doing it. We don't want to rule on which customer is going to use which product. Like if you want a really, really good hedge fund equity research quality model, you should probably use Scout. I mean, if the Daloopa customer is free anyway. And if you're going to use, but if that doesn't matter and you have like more generic Excel use cases, that you probably want to use Cloud for Excel because it's designed for 1,000 things, where Scout is designed to do one tiny, minuscule type of model, but just do it really, really well.
If I'm if I have an existing model and I'm just looking to find the fastest way to update actuals after they're reported so I don't have to go and manually do that, what do you think the best way to do that is right now?
I mean, the Daloopa add-in literally has a button called update. Like we've simplified the whole process to a singular button. So you hit that button and then your model updates. That's
even if it's been a very customized model that I've had to build myself. So do you think that that's still a better path than having Claude in Excel parse my model, create some markdown of it, think through how it might want to go and pull from the Daloopa API and then go and update it?
Yes, because first of all, the way you do it with us is just a button. So nothing is easier than just hitting a button.
Button's easy.
A button's easy. And the second thing is it's latency matters, right? Like why did we make it a button? Why didn't we just make it a prompt box? Because every second matters when you're trying to update a model. Like some of the most amount of effort we've ever put into like our data is actually leaving the SEC documents and going into the press wires. Because press wires usually are about...
They hit immediately.
Right, they hit immediately.
Yeah.
They get pushed to you. It doesn't show up on the internet yet. The press wires are always precede the internet. Right? Because internet, you have server lag. The SEC server lags a little bit more because everybody's hitting it at the same time. But the problem for press wires is a text file. Like from a data structure perspective, it is maniacally hard to like versus the SEC, like beautiful table structure and all of that. However, if you can parse the press wire, you can get the lowest latency data update. So we are so obsessed with latency that we would literally say, we will find every wire in the world and we'll figure out every data structure in every wire and be able to capture those data structures in less time than the SEC server lag. Right? Like that's how obsessed we are about seconds because our customers care about seconds. And if you use Claude to do the markdown, to do all of that parsing model, like that is seconds that our customers don't have.
Right.
Like that level of obsession of us saying one day, the SEC gives you this really clean document API where you can just grab an AK and it's like delivered to you like nicely and in this beautiful format. And we're like, in order to save our customers 2 to 3 minutes, like let's not do this anymore. Like let's go to the wires and let's like blow up a whole system. It's also why we said, hey, instead of a prompt box, let's just make it a button. Right? We spend an obscene amount of time thinking about saving a few seconds for our customers.
Awesome. And I think that that's been the customer-centric perspective you guys have had since the beginning.
Yeah.
Thomas, it's been awesome having you on the show. I can't wait until the 4th one and you're back in a couple
Something
months.
else will change.
Yeah, and you're telling us how you're changing the world again in the next round. So with that, I want to thank everyone for tuning again. Again, I'm your host, Michael Watson. This is the Hedgineer Podcast, Technology, Data, and AI. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it, we're there. And until the next episode, take it easy. Oh, no, wait, I forgot. This is actually the last episode of season 2, and we're starting a new format, trying to push out weekly episodes for season 3. And so I guess it couldn't be any better to end it with Thomas, who's now the only person that's been on 3 episodes so far. So
Thank you, Michael.
yeah, of course. Until the next episode, take it easy, everyone.